Research Library Podcast, ein Podcast der Universitätsbibliothek Wien. Liebe Hörerinnen und Hörer, willkommen zu einer neuen Folge des Research Library Podcast. Mein Name ist Martin Gasteiner. In dieser Episode spreche ich mit einem Mann, der mit seinem Werk Pentiment neue Wege geht, um historische Erfahrung erfahrbar zu machen. Josh Sawyer. Mit Pentiment hat er ein Computerspiel geschaffen, das wie kaum ein anderes die Möglichkeit des Mediums Computerspiel auslotet, um Geschichte, Buchkultur und Denken auf neue Weise darzustellen. Es geht nicht darum, Geschichte zum Leben zu erwecken, sondern darum, wie sie in andere Formen der Erzählung überführt werden kann. Lesbar, spielbar, reflektierbar. Das Spiel ist im 16. Jahrhundert im fiktiven bayerischen Ort Tassing und dem nahegelegenen Kloster Kiersau verortet. Zur Zeit der Reformation, einer Epoche voller Umbrüche und Konflikte. Der Schauplatz ist erfunden, aber alles wirkt historisch fundiert. Von den Dialekten bis zu den Schrifttypen, von den Alltagsritualen bis zu den theologischen Debatten. Sawyer, ursprünglich Historiker, erklärt im Gespräch seinen Zugang zur Geschichte, der von Familiengeschichte über die Faszination für mittelalterliche Buchkunst bis zu Rollenspielen und Theater reicht. Er verzichtet bewusst auf Sprecherinnen, um das Lesen selbst zum zentralen Akt zu machen und transformiert gleichzeitig so die Stimme der Spielenden in ein inneres Gespräch mit der Geschichte. Josh Sawyer ist eine feste Größe im narrativen RPG-Genre. Mit Fallout New Vegas prägte er verästelte Geschichten und komplexe Spielsysteme. Mit Pillars of Eternity und Deadfire entwickelte er neue erzählerische Universen. In Pentiment konzentriert er sich erstmal ganz auf eine historische Vision, klein im Maßstab, groß im Anspruch. Wir sprechen über seine künstlerische Entscheidung, Typografie als Stimme zu inszenieren, über seine eher ablehnende Haltung generativer KI gegenüber, über die Arbeit mit einem kleinen Team und darüber, wie viel Denk- und Forschungsarbeit in die Entwicklung dieses Spiels gesteckt wurde. Pentiment ist ein Spiel für alle, die Geschichte interessiert sind. Für Historikerinnen, Bibliothekarinnen, Spielende, Schreibende, für alle, die sich für das Zusammenspiel von Form, Inhalt und Bedeutung interessieren. Ein Gespräch über Spiele, die mehr sind als Unterhaltung und über die Kraft der Vorstellung, wenn sie sich in Bilder, Bücher und Spielmechanik einschreibt. Ich wünsche Ihnen und euch viel Vergnügen beim Zuhören. Thanks very much, Josh.
You're welcome.
For your time. You're here for the first time in Vienna?
No, this is my fourth or fifth time. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Last time was 2019, but I've been coming to Vienna since I want to say 2014, and then also to Graz, and then I've been to Salzburg once.
Yeah, but never to Innsbruck?
No, actually.
But it's part of your game.
It's referenced, but it's not
reference.
it's not in the game. Yeah.
And you do have relatives in Bavaria, distant ones. Okay.
Yeah, my grandmother was born in, it's the central southern part between Swabia and Bavaria, Allgäu.
Allgäu, yeah.
So she was born outside of Kempten, and her father was from Kaufbeuren, and then he was in the war, World War I should say. Be a little more clear.
But the big one.
The big yeah.
British
big
says
one before
only one.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
And that didn't go well. But then after they left, because I mean, it was Weimar, Germany, and they left and they came to the US in 1923, so 101 years ago. Yeah, and then the Depression started.
Yeah.
So it was out of one set of bad circumstances and into another.
But you had a big celebration, 100 years in the US, the whole family?
Oh, no, we didn't.
Nope. No.
No, and my grandmother, unfortunately, is gone, and so is my grandfather, but he was from Austro-Hungary. Those are my links to...
but you get connected to the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Because of your studies in history, I read.
Yeah. So I started when I was young. I would ask my grandparents about our family history. It is a thing that Americans are a little more preoccupied with for various reasons. And for me, it was trying to make sense of things that didn't make sense. My name is Sawyer.
Yeah.
That's not German. It's English. And then I was like, are we English? And they're like, well, no. And then they would explain more. And my grandfather said that he came from a town called Apatin in Hungary. And at the time, there was no internet. So I looked up Apatin, Hungary, and I couldn't find it. And I was very confused. And so then as time went on, I would just try to, write down all the things they could remember. At that time, they were pretty old. And there were a lot of unclear details. And then, I got more documents and things like that and found out that my grandfather had come from Apatin, Austro-Hungary. But it's now Serbia. But then before that, even going way back, they were Donau-Schwaben migrants.
Ah, they were.
From Baden-Württemberg.
Okay.
Near Reutlingen. And then going back even farther, the farthest back I could go was Michael Sawyer, Sayer, who was born in Vienna in 1590.
Really?
Yes. And then he went to, I think, Rexingen, actually, in 1610, and he had 3 sons. And they went in their separate ways. And one of their grandsons was Georg Sawyer, who in, I think, 1742 left Enningen unter Alcham. And he went down the Danube to settle. And that's where my family went. So it's stuff like this where trying to figure out, like, how did her name become Sawyer? And like, are we Hungarian? Are we Austrian? Because there's a lot of German names in our family. And so it's this like desire to kind of figure this stuff out.
But you figured it out really in detail.
Tried to, yeah.
1490, well,
1590. So yeah, and then there were a lot of other things too. Like I'm actually going to talk about it in my talk tonight. But I played role-playing games, played Dungeons and Dragons. Those are all quasi-medieval. They're sort of medieval, but they're not really medieval.
Yeah, and whatever medieval is as a construction.
Yeah, exactly. Like these huge quotes around that I'm making. But
all the time.
But yeah, so I was interested in that. And then, again, trying to make sense of like, when was this armor used and why was it used? Yeah. And like, was scale mail, did it actually exist? Or is that a fabrication? Or so, just digging into that. And then I did in high school and college, I did theater. And I was really interested in Shakespeare's historical plays, specifically Henry V and Richard III.
Okay.
And one of my first big papers that I wrote in college, because I started as a vocal performance, music, and theater major, and one of my first big papers was on Henry V and looking at the historical sources, Hollingshead, things like that, and then later scholarship and contrasting those things. But then I left the Conservatory of Music and became a history major, and a lot of different interests from role-playing games, computer games, family genealogy, historical plays and things like that got me interested in the Holy Roman Empire, early modern period, like late medieval, early modern period. And so a lot of my focus was on that area and that time. And that's when I learned German to the extent that I can speak it, which is not natively, but decently. I can order food. Ich spreche wie ein Kind. But, I can read it decently. And so I studied that. And primarily witch hunting within the Holy Roman Empire and hagiography.
Okay.
And and then when I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do with that degree. And I had already been doing web design in college, and I worked for a game company doing web design.
Okay.
And then I transferred over to game design. And I had this long-term idea of, man, I'd really love to do a historical game.
Yeah.
But it took 20 years to do it. So
it's a really long time to do a historical game. There are historical games, but not one that has in any way the detail.
In terms of detail, I would say that Kingdom Come Deliverance by Warhorse, that is, I would say, similar. It's also a very realistically styled game. So it doesn't go for a historically stylized art style. It's more kind of like cutting edge graphics. But that studio was really big on trying to capture early 15th century Bohemia. And that's the closest thing that I can think in terms of real, serious attention to everything, like how people lived, what they wore, what they ate, how they worked, all that sort of stuff.
But with one difference. Making history wasn't a layer in there. In your game, it is.
That is true, yes.
Yeah? Am I right?
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was very interested in how you transform resources And on another level, how you get involved into the game by your own voice. Because the game mechanics work with your own voice as well. You have to read, not loud, but you have an inner voice, and that has to read within the text and has to do the monologues or the dialects and even the inner monologues.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of game I only experienced as a young boy. Why did you have this kind of a way to approach this? Why there aren't any voices except singing voices?
One, being cheap. So voices are very expensive.
But you yourself are taught in voice, aren't you?
Thank you. We had a huge cast. So, there's over 100 characters, and voice acting is very expensive. There's a lot of lines. There are 33,000 lines in the game. And, even though I haven't worked on historical games before, accents are often part of fantasy games. And frankly, casting for accents is difficult, to say the least, because either you get non-native speakers of the original language who do like Hollywood accents, which don't actually sound like real accents. It's weird. So I have a friend who's an actor, Austrian actor, and she told me she'll be asked to like do a German accent. And she's like, I speak German natively. And she's like lived in Berlin for a long time. And they'll say, well, no, but like a real German accent. And she's like, what are you talking about? But this happens to everybody. This happens for French, all sorts of things. So the idea of casting a really large cast of characters that have quite subtle differences in dialect based on regional, we have Brother Matthew, and Brother Matthew is from a French-speaking part of Switzerland. And we have Brother Guy, who is from Burgundy. And we have Bavarians, and we have,
Italian influences.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the idea of trying to cast for that sounds like a nightmare to me, but also it just would have been phenomenally expensive.
But Microsoft has the money? Probably.
Yeah, but the whole project was conceived as inherently small in scale. Sure. So I didn't want to overly inflate that aspect of it. There is another practical aspect to it, which is that we can take our time with the writing. One thing that people don't necessarily think of when it comes to voice acting is how it affects the logistical process. Because casting and recording for voice, it takes months. So if you're just writing text, you do have to localize it, put it in whatever languages you're releasing it in. But otherwise, you can keep writing pretty close up to the deadline of shipping the game. When you record something for voice, you have to cast very early. And then you have to, months in advance, have to actually record all of that. And if you change lines, then you need to bring people back into the studio to match what you changed. So that's not fun. And especially, again, with a lot of characters. So I've worked on games. I've worked on 2 games with full voice acting. It's a logistical nightmare. It takes a huge amount of time and resources. And yeah, by Obsidian standards, 33,000 lines of dialogue is actually not that much, but it's still a lot. And for a team of, 13 people at any given time, it's too much. So just right away, I said, we're not going to do voice acting. This is all going to be done through text. And the book hands and the printed typeface will be the voices of the people. I mean, that was actually the biggest focus resource-wise for features of the game, were building the fonts and then how those fonts were rendered in the game.
Not only rendered, but also filled up when you read.
Absolutely.
This was a kind of a very distinct process, I recognized, because there's a certain kind of time management then when you read it, because you are kind of guided through the text.
Yes.
Is this a kind of director's idea or a moment of...
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there is something to be said for preparing the audience for what's to come.
Okay.
And although we have easy read fonts, because there are people that have like real cognitive issues with like certain typefaces and things like that, we do have that option. But the standard way the game is played, my attitude was, if you don't like reading, you shouldn't play the game. It's not that you're bad or something for not liking it, but this just isn't a game for you. You're going to read a lot of people talking about a lot of things. I would think of Umberto Eco as a big influence for, obviously through Name of the Rose, but also Baudolino, Foucault's Pendulum indirectly. But there's something that Eco has done in a number of his books where there's an early chapter, sometimes it's the first, sometimes it's the second chapter, where there is something that is like painfully difficult to get through. And in Bottolino, it's literally the first chapter, which is Bottolino learns to write. And Bottolino, the titular character, writes very crudely in a number of different languages phonetically. And he is actually writing a palimpsest because he says, I have a hymnal and I'm scraping it away. So in the middle of the text, sometimes Bottolino's text stops and it starts in a Latin hymnal. Okay. And then it goes back into Bottolino. So if you are not interested in Latin and seeing Italian phonetic interpretations of German, you should not read Bottolino, because we're going to be dealing with a lot of not stuff that's this difficult every chapter, but this is the subject matter. So part of the pace, it was actually slower, and the team had to sort of slowly cajole me into getting the text faster and also allowing an instant dialogue option. And I said, it's not that I'm opposed to it, inherently opposed to it, but I have to resist it as much as I can. I have to like give as little ground as I can to make it work, because I accept that some people don't want to read the antiquated fonts. I accept that some people don't want to wait for the font to fill in, et cetera, et cetera. That's okay. But I have to make it the way I'm envisioning it first and not give in to the temptation to make it super easy, because it is an inherently challenging thing. That's the way that it was approached. And I do think that people that do play it in other modes, I'm glad they can play it. I do think that they are missing part of the experience by playing it that way, because it was intended to be consumed in a certain way.
But your main intention or your process was, well, I'm writing a text, or was there always a game in mind?
No, there was always a game in mind. I'm very visual, actually. I just envision scenes and characters and things like that. I didn't know this at the time, but when I watched a documentary, or not a documentary, it was an interview with Echo from, I think, the early 2000s. And he said that when he started writing Name of the Rose, he started writing it at, I think, 47 or 48, which is very close to when I started working on Pentiment. He said it was the age when men either throw away their lives and sail away to the Caribbean with a ballerina, or they write a novel. So he said that he wrote a novel, but he said the first thing he started with was a list of names of monks. And that's actually what I had done, is I started with a list of names of monks. I didn't know that's what his process was, but I had, obviously it was influenced by Name of the Rose, but like this large cast of monks and nuns and what they looked like, and then the spaces that they inhabited. I had a vision of the Dance of Death in the chapter house. I could picture that in my head. And I could picture the shrine with the hand of St. Moritz. And there were certain other things that were really like kind of springing into my mind. And so it started with these characters and the space. And when we first developed our prototype, it was a very different story, because it was like a 2-hour experience. And you were investigating the murder of Brother Guy.
Okay.
And you never went into town. It was only within the abbey. And so it was all about navigating that space and figuring out how conversations worked, how evidence works, how the trial itself worked. And so it's a holistic approach, but it starts in my mind with pictures. It starts with images, and then I write some of that stuff down. And I tend to not bear down really tightly on any one thing, because I want to put a lot of loosely defined things into a space and then see them as a whole before I start like really getting aggressive about, this is exactly what we're going to do from A to Z.
But you envisioned it, but on the other hand, did you have anybody who draw?
Oh, absolutely. So that was,
there's a process beside this.
Yeah. Okay. So I had Hannah Kennedy, and she was my art director. She's amazing.
Yeah.
And she, she is very analytical. So, I gave her this high level idea of, the subject matter, the time period. But I said, I kind of want to see if we can blend the styles from late medieval, mostly deluxe manuscript style, and early modern woodcuts. Like, can we kind of blend these into a new synthesized art style? So she took those, and then she isolated the elements that make them each up in great detail. And, literally things like, in painted manuscripts, white is often used on top of other colors. That does not happen in print. Simple things like that, like dark outlines are used in print for these things. These are not typically done in paintings. So lots of things like that to break down these characteristics, and then blending them. And then also she took a lot of inspiration. This kind of also went over into animation with Kathy Nichols, our animation director. We looked at Cartoon Saloon. They had developed Secret of Kells, also Song of the Sea and Wolfwalkers. And Secret of Kells is an amazing animated film about the creation of the Book of Kells. And their art style doesn't really look like the Book of Kells, but it is strongly inspired by it. And we were inspired by that. So Hannah kind of blended almost like elements of Cartoon Saloon, late medieval, deluxe manuscript creation, and then early modern print woodcuts. Yeah. And I think she just did an amazing job. But from the very beginning, I told my boss, Fergus, I said, let me talk to Hannah, because if Hannah can't figure out an art style, there's no point to doing the project.
Okay.
And I believe that, like, if she had tried and just said, like, I can't come up with anything, or it just wasn't working, I don't think we could have done it. Because again, I start with something visual, and if that thing can't be manifested, if that visualization can't be manifested, even if that means it changes over time, that's okay. But if it just can't materialize, then I don't feel like I can move forward with it.
This was the strongest relationship with you and Hannah.
Certainly at the beginning, but my closest, I think over the course of the project, my closest relationship was probably with Kate Dollarhide, who was the second and other main writer on the project. We had two other writers, I should mention, Zoe Franznik and Martin Radisep, and they were fantastic, but they came significantly later in the project. But Kate and I collaborated very heavily on a lot of things. Kate is much better at story structure and plotting than I am. I don't think I'm particularly good at it at all. I think I can come up with some cool character ideas and visualizations for them and dialogue, but she's very good at the actual structuring and plotting.
Okay.
And so we worked together a lot on that. And then we sort of found our own spaces within the cast. So Kate doesn't really know anything about history. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but that's not her focus of study. She studied literature. She's a writer. She's a very funny writer. And so she did a really good job with a lot of the peasant families. I have a background, obviously, in history, but also theology and how that intersects with history. So I wrote almost all of the characters that talk a lot about theology or magic or things like that. So, we sort of found our spaces. And then later when Zoe Franznik came on, she's a Latinist by training. So she focused on some of the Roman stuff and the Latin. She did a huge amount of Latin translations. And then Martin Radisep has sort of this philosophical background. So he did some of the, Dr. Werner Stolz. I think he also did a lot of Baltus, the inventor.
But the dialogue between the nun and Andreas.
Oh, yeah, I wrote that.
In the books, because they transform into the book as well. This was super, because I thought, well, now you're dealing really history, the whole concept, and you have to, project yourself into it.
Yes.
And then you can paint, and then you can read. And there is a kind of very special relationship between the written words and the picture. How is your approach to this? Because I thought this was really special in the gameplay as well.
Thank you. Again, it was sort of a vision thing where I think I started with the idea of them talking about books, and then the books that they were talking about, I think I had this idea of them being in them as the characters. So when we're talking about Dido and Aeneas, the idea of what if Illuminata is Dido? And and then, Illuminata as the princess and Andreas as the knight. And then finally the dialogue between love and reason from The Mirror of Simple Souls, and with Illuminata as love actually and Andreas as reason, even though it should probably be reversed. But so there was the idea of them just being in the books and sort of transposed onto the figures. Yeah. And because books were going to be such a big focus, I felt like it's not enough to kind of talk about books and have people writing in books that are, 10 pixels tall on the screen. I was like, let's dive in. And so there's a lot of places where you see full screen a book in detail. But I did want these scenes early on where you actually are physically inside the book. And I wanted to have something that was, classical in nature. Obviously, it's a more recent manuscript, but, the Aeneid was popular to keep copying throughout the Middle Ages. So even though it's an ancient story, you have a more recent manuscript of it. And then you have Wretched Garin, which represents the most modern thing, or one of the most modern things you see in the game. a popular story in print in Italian. So it's actually in a colloquial language. It's not in Latin. And then finally you have something written in French and heretical and from, 300 years earlier. So just different styles of books and different themes and different ways of looking at it. I found that it's not always true that if I'm excited for something, that everybody's going to be excited for something. But if I can communicate what is exciting about it to them, they can help bring out that spirit in things. And for me, I was like, that's the books. It's actually looking at these manuscripts in detail and seeing all the labor that goes into them and the specificity of things. And I'm always really, really fastidious about detail. So for example, like if you look at that part when Dido and Aeneas are talking, or it's not Dido and Aeneas are talking, but Dido and Aeneas are her death, basically, when he leaves Carthage. It's the associated text from that part of the Aeneid, even to the point where I had Zoe write summaries for every act of the game in Latin, and those went into the margins of the big book. So when you zoom out and you look at the things, there's Latin written above and around it. And if you zoom out and look at it, it's actually telling the story of what's happening in the act.
Super.
Because I wanted everything to fit and work together. And actually, there's a bug.
There's a bug.
Well, it's gone now, but it was there at launch. I was extremely concerned throughout all of development. I told people, I said, do not use lorem ipsum. Don't use it anywhere because it's faux Latin and it will look like it's supposed to be in our game, but it is not. And if we miss one, then we're going to have lorem ipsum in our game. So then right away the game launched, and in the opening scene, there's the credits book with the music playing over it. And there was one page of lorem ipsum, and it was only on screen for like a second, but a Latinist saw it and he's like, that's not real Latin, that's lorem ipsum. I'm like,
But it's a kind of Cicero, isn't it? They always sold me. So only designers would know.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably yes.
Yeah.
So we are a library here. So you have to love books here.
Yes.
So it's a kind of a home game here for you. But I love that the nuns are defending the library. They are behind it. Andreas finds in the crypta how to get to the library, but he can't at the beginning. Only the nuns possess the library. They can give the books. They can take it again.
Yes.
Why?
So I was thinking about how things would be divided. Obviously, there's also a little bit of inspiration from Name of the Rose, from Malachi, who was the librarian. But the idea that this was once a double monastery, which did exist, there were Benedictine double monasteries. And for a very long time, they were usually, when there were two houses, one of nuns, one of monks, they were usually under the control until about the 12th century of abbesses. And within such a place, I worked with as my college advisor, but he was an advisor on the project, Ed Kern, and we did a little research together on that and he found more than I did that typically everything was doubled. So it was almost like they were just two side-by-side things. They have separate chapter houses. They would have separate, obviously, dormitories, but they would have separate spaces to do all their things. And then there were some spaces that were common. Yeah. And thinking about how the library was set up and how the scriptorium was set up, and I was thinking, well, if somebody needs to handle the books, and traditionally in the past, the abbess ran the thing, then following the sort of Name of the Rose, like the librarian becomes the abbess. So the idea was that the women were responsible for the books, but they were not doing the scribing or the illuminating, at least not at the time that the story takes place. There is certainly evidence. Actually, there's a great book by Alison Beach about women scribes in Germany that I thought was very fantastic. It was a reference for the game. There were some quite accomplished female scribes. So they did exist, but I figured that once men started taking over the double monasteries, that would shift. So then it became a division where they didn't want the men and the women to be sharing the same space. So there's a door at the library. And if you want books from the library, then you request them from the librarian, who is Illuminata. And then the men in the scriptorium do the work.
But they do have the garden as well.
They do have the garden. So there were certain things where early on, there were certain things that for practical purposes, we just couldn't it just didn't work out very well. So there is a loquarium. There are 2 loquariums. There's one for the women, one for the men. The women's one has a screen. I had an idea that the women were more sequestered than they are in the game.
Okay.
And that you would have to go either to the loquarium or you'd have to go around the side and peek over the wall into the area you see in Act 3, actually, where the women are, to talk to them. One, that was logistically tricky, and 2, that would have been so annoying. And so we started talking about trying to do that. And then people brought up a lot of concerns about like, man, this is going to be really rough to like talk to any of these characters, and especially privately. And so then what we did is there are times where the women are in the shrine together and they're in a group. And there are times when the women are in the garden together, almost always in a group. And then, you know, I sort of concocted a few other ideas about specific characters where there was a little more leeway, such as Sister Gertrude collecting things on her own in the woods. And that was less of a strictly allowed and more like ignored thing. And then there is the story actually about Sister Matilda as the kitchener, or actually the cellarer, not the kitchener, but as the cellarer going to town, previously alone, and then suffering some very horrible fate because of that. And so now she travels with the male cellarer, but then there are issues with that as well. You know, there are things that I had to think through, and some of this is for convenience, but some of it is also that there would not be so many admonitions about people not following the rule if people were following the rule.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Ed Kern sort of taught me is if people are making laws about something, it's because people are doing that thing that they don't want you to do. So I did have this idea of Kearsarge as a somewhat lax, discipline-wise abbey.
Yeah.
And it has a variety of people who have different levels of devotion, but it's neither like party central, nor is it as strictly cloistered as, you know, a more regulated. I mean, that's the thing. And they're Benedictines. And certainly over time, the number of attempts to reform the rule of Benedict and a way of living because it just wasn't working.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think this is okay. I think it's okay.
He started a few times, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and he was supposed to be murdered as well. I think so.
Yeah, what's that?
Benedict.
Oh, Benedict? Yeah.
She should have been murdered with poison, I think. And then he's going to do Monte Cassino or so.
Oh, that's right.
Getting bigger. You know?
That's right.
I was wondering, you're talking about the stories like you have this book in mind all the time. Are you thinking of a second part? Are you thinking further? Pentiment Part 2? Because it's really dense how you speak about it. And it's not yesterday. It's like you're living still in it or directing it.
Yeah. No, I don't have any plans for a sequel, and I never did. You know, I think part of it was I did want to really focus on this as a standalone story, standalone characters that had a full and complete arc, which is not to say that I couldn't imagine other stories with these characters or another story similar in at least maybe themes or style, way of telling. But yeah, it was always conceived as just a standalone thing. And I'm very happy with where that ended. We did joke a number of times about having, because publishers always want DLC. Thankfully, in the case of Pentiment, they did not ask for DLC. But I said, okay, so the DLC idea would be Rudiger and Matthew go off and they have like some detective adventure together. The gay monks, they go off together and have an adventure. We never seriously explored that, but it was always something we joked about.
Super.
Yeah. So, but you know, I could see other types of games that could be in this style, but it's like you said, I do kind of picture things holistically. And so I can visually navigate very easily through these spaces and talk about them like I'm seeing them, because that's,
but is there a possibility to hand this in as a PhD for you?
Oh, geez,
this could be a doctorate.
I don't know. It's funny because I was recently mentioning, because I only got a bachelor's degree. When I was in college, I was not a very good student, honestly. I was on academic probation twice, but that was also like, 30 years ago or something. Yeah. So I have recently thought about the idea of at least getting a master's. but I haven't been in school for so long, and I don't even know what's involved in any of that.
But you have done the work, haven't you?
Well, I've done some work. It's weird because I have such an outside view of what's actually involved in getting advanced degrees. And so I don't really know what that work is like. And yeah, I feel like I did do a lot of work, and other people have said things to me of like, oh, this is like on par with the work you do for, whether it's a master's or a PhD. Yeah. And I don't know if that's true. But certainly I obviously still have an enduring interest in history. It didn't disappear when I graduated from college. I mean, as I'll say tonight, the reference library that I started with were the books that I used in college. I liked those books. I liked being able to go back and look at them and reference things out of curiosity. And I expanded them. I studied more things. Yeah. And I hesitate to say that it is actually comparable to the work required for those things, but it is something that I've been thinking about more just because I've been interfacing with academics so much more, and obviously academia. Yeah. So maybe.
Because when the history of media came up, so in the late 90s, I can remember that profs did say, in the next century, you can do computer games to get your PhD. So probably this is the way.
Awesome. I didn't even know.
One question I have in this direction as well. The game was developed 2019, 18?
Yeah, 2019 was when we started.
So before ChatGPT.
Yes.
Would it change the work you did then? Because I was wondering if you have a feeling how your game design or directing a game changed within this new kind of AI?
Most of the proposed applications of generative AI, one, don't appeal to me on an aesthetic level. And two, I think there are, and more importantly, there are deep ethical concerns with the use of it.
Yes.
And I don't think, well, certainly for me, because I'm quite opposed to the use of it, it wouldn't have changed my approach to making the game. Everything that was made in the game was handmade by a person, and every character that we designed was designed by a person and written by a person. And I think Obsidian games, and specifically Pentiment, but I think our other games as well, people come to it because they like the individual characters. And I would even go farther and say that I think they like the things that they can talk to the characters about specifically. So for example, I saw some research today. Sorry, I hate this stuff so much. Honestly, it was about using generative AI for dialogues. And there's this graph that said unlimited inputs, unlimited outputs. I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think that players actually want to endlessly talk to a character that turns them into a Wikipedia. I don't really believe that that is true. And so, for example, Václav in the game, the Romani character, he has a very specific, very weird cosmology. And that cosmology is somewhat Gnostic. And people have asked me, because they want to pin it down. They're like, is this Gnosticism? And I'm like, not really, but it has Gnostic elements. It's just his beliefs. It's literally just his own personal beliefs. And I go back to the inspiration for that, which was Minocchio, the miller from the She's the Worms. And he was condemned not for heresy, but for founding a heretical movement because his beliefs were so unique and weird that they were unlike anything the Inquisitors had seen. And I don't think a character like Václav, if that character were written with ChatGPT, how, what, to what end? And do you want to talk to Václav endlessly about his cosmology? Probably not. Do you want to talk to Václav about literally anything? I don't think you do. I think you want to talk to him about the things that the writers came up with for this character. And if it's a good character, then you're going to enjoy it. So there are certain art applications that I do see potential for, but there are really deep ethical concerns with the use of the sourcing of the data for these large language models, and whether it's ChatGPT or whatever. And in many cases, they're already being used to cut out labor. Absolutely. So I'm not in favor of that. So from my perspective, it would not have changed anything at all.
Super statement. Thanks for that. But how do you think about the graphical level to have AI working? Because they're quite good in graphical design as well.
Yeah, that is true. So that's where it gets back to what are the data sets that are being sourced to make this? I've seen a lot of skepticism about quality, especially when it comes to 3D models. They're very technical in how they're made, and they require a lot of analysis and careful, shrewd thinking to build them in a way that's performant, that runs well in the engine. And AI is getting better at doing that, but in many cases, it looks like it's spitting out the data that it was given. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, I could just buy something from a library, so why wouldn't I? You know, like there are 3D libraries where I can go, and if I want to buy a coffee mug, 3D coffee mug, and then change the topology of it, I can do that right now. I don't need AI to do that. But if you're going to take effectively unsourced and uncompensated art that no one agreed to contribute to a database and then use that, well, now you're just ripping people off. What you're doing is you're effectively laundering stolen assets through an AI. And that's reprehensible. I mean, it's reprehensible on multiple levels. So again, this is a space where I see potential for it. But the way I approach all of this is to say, I am going to think of a bunch of ethical concerns, and until you answer all the ethical concerns, I am not interested in talking about applications.
So you're going back to the States now with a few new ideas in mind?
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I had an idea. I'm not actually going to do this.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not doing this, but I had an idea, which was I was standing in the Antonine Baths, the ruins, obviously. And I was like, what if there were a game? It's an alternate history game, Carthago Delenda Est, which is, it actually imagines that Carthage was not destroyed, but became the dominant culture. And so it's trying to project how Carthage as an empire, like Carthage became the Rome of the world, basically. And it's not much more developed than that, but I was like, going back to the name of the rose, like, you know, the original rose remains only in name. You know, like all we have of Carthage is like these meager scraps of nothing and descriptions and ideas, but we can't know what it was. But then like, we also don't know what it could have been. And so I was like, that could be cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm very inspired by history always. I can't say that there's a specific game that I have in mind for the future, but it was so wonderful being able to see, obviously, ancient ruins, most notably in Tunisia, and also Rome, of course. I got to see a bunch of beautiful stuff in Marrakesh. I went to Toledo, and I got to see the cathedral there, which is beautiful. Also, I went to Toledo on Corpus Christi. And I didn't realize that I was going there on Corpus Christi, but the streets were full of children and there was a procession. And yeah, it's all very inspirational.
On the part of the Menocchio, Carlo Klein's book, I loved this book. It was inspirational to me the whole time through. What do you think about the imagination that is set there? About someone who learns to read and his brain is ignited by something really strongly. And he gets to beliefs and forms and thinking never been done before. Was this inspiration to your kind of thinking in your game as well?
I think so. I mean, I'll touch upon it tonight, but one of the things that I kind of was trying to dispel, which is I think a persistent myth about people in the past, is that especially peasantry or people of that sort of social status were inherently just dumber. And, you know, no capability for imagination, no capability for personal belief. They believed literally what they were told, and they never questioned it, and they never had any sort of interior thought about it. Obviously, Menocchio, it is microhistory. So the whole point is that this is one guy. But that being said, many microhistories have been done of many people that had many crazy beliefs. Sorry, I shouldn't say crazy, but like radical beliefs, let's say.
Just no sources.
Marguerite Perret, who wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls. She had some pretty out there ideas, and they're amazing. And that book, I think, is fantastic to read. Another thing that I found very inspirational, I can't read French very well, but I did buy the Fournier Register, which is Jacques Fournier. He eventually became Benedict XII, and he was an inquisitor in southern France, and he interrogated Cathars to bring them back into the fold of Catholicism. And one of the things that I think was quite striking is that, one, people were not, most of them were not too afraid to tell him what they thought in terms of Cathar beliefs, but then also they had their own folk beliefs that were quite well developed. And they were not afraid to say, yes, I believe that changelings steal children. And, when there are a few instances where Jacques Fournier would say, well, the church says that that's not true. I can't remember the specifics, but it's been a long time since I've looked at it. But this woman said, well, my sister saw it happen. And so I think that the church is wrong and my sister is right. Are you going to tell me that that's not true? And yes, obviously the church is very powerful and many people did suffer very dire consequences for opposing the church, Minocchio being one of them. But I guess it kind of speaks to the fact that, and of course, average people are average people, and there are smart people and there are not so smart people. But people did possess the capacity to imagine and our myths came out of a desire to explain things. And if there weren't explanations, and that's how syncretism worked when Christianity passed through, is Christianity answers all of these questions, but then there are all these other questions that our personal folk beliefs answer, and we hold these things together. And we see no conflict in them. And that's why the Inquisition started going through initially to correct and say, okay, I know you believe in the green man, but I know you believe that a dog can be a saint, but people are capable of establishing a cohesive view of the world, whether they're doing it consciously or just living their lives and incorporating different ideas and different beliefs that they receive from different sources, orthodox or otherwise. Yeah.
I have a question in mind that refers to Echo and the Name of the Rose.
Sure.
Because I can remember my perspective on the Middle Ages and early modern really changed when I saw that dirt there. In your game, there is nearly no dirt. Where's the dirt gone?
Yeah, I guess because we were trying to achieve an art style that eschewed the use of dirt, we weren't really heavy on that. To me, it became kind of a trope in films set in medieval times that no one wipes, they're just filthy. They're completely content to be filthy constantly. And while, bathing was obviously not as common and et cetera, I don't think people were just filthy all the time. That being said, though, it was a dirty life because manual labor, it kind of goes to this other sort of really annoying meme that in the past few years have been going around about did you know that medieval peasants had more vacation time than you? I'm like, did you know that medieval peasants had to do backbreaking labor every day of their lives? And they had to do everything that we take for granted that is automated by electricity or structure of pipes or whatever. Medieval peasants had to go do by hand, literally by hand, by foot. And they
died young.
And they died young. That was, something we tried to get across in the game is infant and child mortality was just unbelievably high. It's unfathomable. So yeah, they were really hard lives and dirty lives, but we did not put mud all over everything. So
Josh, it was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Yeah, super that you had the time, and looking forward to playing your other games.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Great.
Sie finden den Research Library Podcast auf rlp.univ.ac.at sowie in allen gängigen Podcast-Portalen. Hinter den Kulissen arbeiten Maria Frenay und ich, Martin Gasteiner, daran, Ihnen spannende Einblicke in die Welt der Forschung und Bibliotheken zu bieten. Wenn Ihnen unser Podcast gefällt, freuen wir uns über ein Abo, eine Bewertung und natürlich darüber, wenn Sie ihn weiterempfehlen. Vielen Dank fürs Downloaden, Abonnieren, aber vor allem fürs Zuhören.